During the starting period of oyster harvesting in the Chesapeake Bay, the colonists' implements and techniques had not been very efficient, and could not harvest enough oysters to sustain a good and healthy food source. The harvesting of oysters in the Chesapeake Bay had originally begun in the 1700s. This process had begun slow and was not at all harmful to the Chesapeake. Very scarce numbers of oysters were harvested at once. During the times of the 1700s, oystering was modest and was something that had been very scarce and at a low level considering how it kicked off in the 1800s. According to the website Baltimore Sun, during the 1800s, the use of dredging equipment was used and had broken the barriers of how the Chesapeake would be remembered as forever. The Baltimore Sun article, A Brief History of the Chesapeake, states that in 1839, over 700,000 bushels of oysters were caught, and that number would then double within the next 2 decades. To put that into scale, 1 bushel indicates 100 oysters. To further the thought of how detrimental this was to the bay, according to the United Press International's article, it explicitly says that oysters take 18 to 24 months to fully mature. During the 1865, the use of dredging was increased a massive amount, to 5 million. After 1865, oystering collection had peaked during the 1880s, in a range of 14 to 20 million bushels harvested at a yearly rate. As this goes on, the event described as Oyster Wars had taken place. As states in the article from Baltimore Sun, this event during the late 1800s was when oyster pirates in legal watermelon in Maryland and Virginia had fought over the rights to the oyster harvesting and distributing from the Chesapeake Bay. This scuffle would not end until the mid-20th century. During the early 1900s, the oyster industry had started slowing down because of the bay being left overfished. In Baltimore Sun's article, it says throughout 1950 and 1960, new diseases in the Chesapeake emerged, further damaging the oyster population. The oyster population had been destroyed to such an unrecognizable state that in 2010, Maryland was subjugated to pass a law that 24% of the Chesapeake is sectioned off from oyster boats and would be used to restore the dwindling oyster amounts in the Chesapeake. Though it will take thousands of years, the bay has gone from many mountains of oysters, nearly breaking tension from the water, to few oysters compared to the historic levels, and unless we do something immediately, this effect that we have had on the oysters of the Chesapeake will be irreversible. Now you may have gotten this far into the documentary and found out, okay, so the oyster population had dramatically decreased over the past few centuries, but what does that really change? For one, oysters are eaten in tons every year. In an article written by health.howstuffworks, it tells you that the amount of oysters eaten by humans on an average year is 2.5 billion oysters. The fact that humans eat a lot of oysters isn't that much of a well-kept secret, but they aren't just for feeding. Oysters are a key part of environment at the Chesapeake Bay. In an article written by ChesapeakeBay.net, it says that the oysters in the Chesapeake Bay are behind the whole filtering of the bay. They keep the bay clean. The oysters pumped water through their gills, trapping many abnormalities such as nutrients, sediments, dangerous chemicals, and even food. The oysters are the reason the bay life can thrive so much of the Chesapeake. One single oyster can filter 50 gallons of water every day. The article from ChesapeakeBay.net explicitly states, over the past century, the watershed has experienced a change in land use, as urban, suburban, and agriculture areas have replaced forested lands. The humans have not just been overfishing this long. It's not that simple, as the oysters, due to recent habitat changes over the years, have made the oysters do much more work than they're used to. This habitat change has introduced way more residue and sediment to the water that they are subjected to filter. This is the reason to why all all of the oyster population in the Chesapeake has been decimated, and that's why we have wrongfully treated the oysters that we oh so desperately need.